Dr. Jazz.
David, I mean,
Dr. Jazz.
I listened to your solo album, Plays John Coltrane and Pete Seeger.
Oh, cool.
First of all, I never thought I would say these two names in the same sentence, but okay. But it's, you know, you did self-portrait 10 years ago. And how do you look on your piano playing, solo piano, if you compare it now, just your personal view, you know, your solo approach, and what does it mean playing solo piano for you? Actually, I mean, you know, the piano solo heritage, it's immense, from Art Tatum to,
Right.
you know, to Keith Jarrett, to anyone. And so what's your view here?
Yeah. No, I think solo piano is really interesting. I'm very interested in solo piano, and particularly, you know, with what we've been dealing with this COVID and the pandemic, you know, so somebody called me to talk about, you know, how, you know, I was using the pandemic, and he was kind of leading me in the direction of, you know, learning new technologies and getting more involved with social media and like live streaming and all this. And it's like, those were great responses, but that wasn't the most natural response for me. I mean, the real response for me was just to practice piano a lot. And so, you know, piano players are kind of lucky. I mean, anybody can play solo. You can have a solo voice, you can have a solo saxophone, you know, and there are great records of a lot of those things, solo bass, you know. But like you said, piano solo is kind of a thing, and it has its own tradition. And, you know, I think because of the nature of the instrument, obviously, you know, piano is a pseudo orchestra.
Yeah.
So you can do counterpoint, you can do stride piano, you can talk about jazz, you can do jazz related things, you can do classical related things. You know, it's such a wide open and diverse, you know, sort of field. Then also the things you work on for solo piano often have like a big impact on how you play with groups, because it's understanding the instrument, you know. So some of my favorite solo piano that I've heard, for example, I went to hear Wayne and Herbie, and they were playing like I heard their duo when they did that record 1+1.
Yeah,
but
it's beautiful.
yeah, for Wayne's birthday, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they did a concert in New Jersey, and they just improvised, and it was so great, and it was so interesting, and I was always on the edge of my seat listening to them play, but they didn't play very, you know, they didn't really, there was no architecture really to what they were doing. It was it sounded just like two guys thinking together.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just such an interesting musical event. So, I mean, one of the things that I think we deal with as improvisers and as jazz musicians is that we're always playing in sort of these established kind of musical frames. If you're playing a bebop tune, or if you're playing a trio with a bass player. I played trio last night with a really nice trio that I like a lot at a club called Mesro in New York.
Oh, who did you play with?
I played with Billy Mintz on drums.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
And Sean Conley on bass.
Oh, man, beautiful. Woo.
Yeah. So before and I mean, I've had a lot of nice trios recently. I've been playing a lot with Tony Shear and Adam Cruz, and anyway, but this one really had a great vibe to it, and I think I'd like to record them if I can. Maybe that'll be my next project. But anyway, you know, but the things you do as a solo, look, we play solo piano all the time, right? Because when you're practicing, you're playing solo piano, but it's different when you're performing as a solo pianist. So one of the things that was nice for me about what was nice about the pandemic, it sounds weird when you put it that way, but one of the things that I managed to do that I could stand was some of these live stream concerts, and actually some concerts at venues, and playing solo was, you know, something I could work on, something I could develop. It's something that I've been trying to figure out how to do for the last probably 20 years, you know, and it's like, it's an ongoing proposition. One of the things that's been nice for me, I go to Japan a lot, as you know. I'm getting ready to go again. And I've done some solo piano tours there where I'll have like 10 solo gigs in a row or something, concerts and stuff. And by the end of it, I always feel like, wow, I really have a better understanding of how to do this, because a lot of it is figuring out how you're going to play with the space, and it can be, you can think of solo piano playing in terms of that tradition you're describing. You can also think of solo piano playing as like a duo with space. Yeah. And that's something I often try and think of for myself. But, just to have it feel like I think that I'm, without self-aggrandizing, I'm going for that thing that I heard in Herbie's playing where it's not so much that you are listening to a polished performance exactly how he wants to play it necessarily, but you're listening to his mind and his sort of concept, like his working with the elements, just like playing with like how to express some of those solo pianistic ideas. And that's kind of, obviously I've been, like a lot of pianists, I've been really influenced by counterpoint ideas, and that's become a big deal ever since really everybody, but particularly after pianists after Brad Meldau and all that, Fred Hirsch, so I'm influenced by that. But I also have to say I play a lot of, another thing I did during the pandemic was I played online duos, but like alternating with a good friend of mine, a pianist named Bruce Barth. Oh yeah. And we get together and we play, and then he'd take 2 or 3 choruses, then I would take 2 or 3 choruses. And so one of the things that I have noticed in his playing that I really like is he's always intent on the storytelling, like the soloing aspect. He doesn't care, he's more in the camp of don't let the counterpoint overwhelm the solo in a way. Yeah. I think I wonder if I can shut that off. Maybe not. Anyway, hopefully I think that's the last ding. So okay. Anyway, it's weird because I don't get that much stuff. Anyway, all right. So those are things I think about a lot. But for me, I would say this idea of counterpoint, which is all about assigning.
It's like it sounds like you're saying something wrong, and the computer is like, dang, no.
Well, I am definitely saying things wrong, and that will only continue the whole time we do this. So yeah, it's good that we now have the computer technology capable of calling me on my bullshit, whatever it is. So, but no, so that's another thing that I try and balance, because the other thing is I'm attracted to jazz and jazz soloing, and sometimes it's interesting. I called up this one club that I played a lot in Japan. I said, I'd be happy to come solo, and it's easier and it's less risk for you. It's like it's less costly, because I'm booking some gigs while I'm there. And he said, yeah, the problem is I always hire jazz piano players, and when they come and play solo, they stop sounding like jazz piano players. Interesting. And I know what he means, because it's sort of almost become like contemporary improvisational vocabulary that draws pretty heavily on classical sounds. And it's like, yeah, I don't exactly want it. If I wanted to play classical music, I would have practiced more when I was a kid. It's like, I'm being tongue in cheek. I practice a lot, but being a classical musician is a very different thing, sure. And I never really wanted to be that.
Do you ever sit down on piano and just? The last one you play basically tunes, compositions, but like just freely improvise, and where does that lead you usually? Like...
I do that a lot, and I like to do that in context when I'm playing, even with trio too. But the way I played those tunes though on that Coltrane and Pete Seeger record, the Pete Seeger tunes. A lot of times, sometimes hadn't even played them, so it was kind of free association within the context of the tune. The thing that was interesting for me about that record is when I recorded it, it actually started as kind of a joke. I was talking to my friend Matt Wilson, the drummer, and he said he's a very funny guy, and and I was saying, I really want to do a solo piano record, but I had these 2 different ideas. I wanted to do a Coltrane record because I thought that would be interesting, because you don't hear piano players doing the music of John Coltrane that much. And then I thought, but I also kind of wanted to do a Pete Seeger record. I actually wanted to do it before Pete Seeger passed away, and I didn't, so unfortunately. But anyway, and then Matt said, "Oh, you should mix them together and do the music of Coltrane and Pete Seeger." And I was like, "Wow, that's a yeah." So I thought, okay, that's a good, somewhat funny idea. But then when I was actually recording it, they have a lot in common. You know, they're both like they were both political activists. They both have, you know, sort of addressed social issues and that. And also, you know, Coltrane, I mean, there's a branch of the avant-garde that moved in a sort of folk songy kind of direction, you know, ECM music and Don Cherry, you know. So some of this, like moving in that like folk music as like the music of the people and like as a simpler kind of structure, but also very open to being improvised because it's stuff we all kind of know and you don't have to actually plan it out. So what I tried to do with some of that is use, again, like counterpoint and harmony ideas to explore some of that material.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I mean, you know.
Thank you.
When you play piano, you know, like during the pandemic, I also did solo guitar stuff, and it came just out of practicing, like you said, and then you know it pops up like, oh yeah, why not record something? So it's but with piano it's easier, of course. Like you said, you have an orchestra, and you know it's way less intimidating, I guess. Also, then you know I've spoken to Dave Ballou and some other players, trumpet players, and playing like a trumpet or a saxophone solo that's even heavier, right? I mean, than a guitar or piano, of course. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a more difficult thing to take on. But I think the thing about that is you can do that too. Like, I think sometimes, I think this is the point that I was putting in Bruce's mouth. It's something I've heard him say, but also something that I believe, you know, that you can play absolutely anything you want. In fact, some of my favorite solo piano things are like solo piano. There's a great thing that Keith plays on the trio at the at the Deer Head. A trio with Gary Peacock and Paul Motion, and he plays, I think it's the first tune, Solar. And his intro is, man, it's just so great. And it's not, you know, it's not like him playing solo piano. He's playing, you know, just like a solo moment.
Lines,
and it's lines, and it's basically a non-root left hand, and like there's kind of nice movement in the left hand. And I was like, then, you know, that's really completely adequate. I mean, one of the things, you know, so like a million people, I'm sure I've listened to a lot of Bill Evans over the course of my life, but in recent years, I've been more interested in some of his solo stuff. And he was such an exploratory person, you know. So if you listen to like I think it's called the studio sessions, the #2 or something. Anyway, there are some places where he's like barely playing. He's just playing like a couple of notes in his left hand. And it's like, you know, that too is part of it. I think sometimes people, especially younger players, you get so focused on trying to sound like a virtuoso. And it's like, yeah, virtuoso is good. I mean, but obviously you can't say like, you know, anything bad about that. But I think if it, you know, you have to think, what is the thing you're telling somebody? And if what you're telling somebody through your music is, I'm a great musician, 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 listen to all the stuff I can play, listen to all the stuff I can play. After a while, that's not really something people want to hear that much. At least I don't.
No, I agree completely. Yeah. But it's just like what you said, using space also, that's so important. And, you know, playing lines, and it's like on guitar, you know, I fell in love with the G chord during the pandemic. You know, you don't have to augment and diminish everything, and it can be just really simple with a 9 on top, and it's like, man, you know, or whatever. Like sometimes we overplay and overthink, like you said.
Right, because we're so in it, you know, and it's like if you have like, I mean, I think I'm not really very connected to the world of like singer-songwriters and stuff like that, but I know there's a certain appeal to like somebody just delivering a simple idea, you know, with a lot of sincerity, you know, and it's like, well, I mean, that's another thing that Keith said. He said that jazz musicians are afraid to be too obvious. And it's like, I know what you know, sometimes you're kind of hiding with harmony and cool chords and stuff like that. And you have to think, well, is it really organically what I want to say, you know? And I think, you know, for me, there was a period, I spent a lot of time, you know, I've practiced a lot and spent a lot of time on trying to develop the things that the jazz community requires of me. Like, you know, I don't think I would have been in a hurry to learn to play in 7 and 5 and mixed meter tunes and all. And now I like it and I write music that's like that, but it wasn't like I sort of went into it kicking and screaming. It wasn't like, you know, I wasn't like the first one on that bus, you know? So, but like, that's the cool thing about being part of a community. It forces you to do things, you know? So like when you're playing with someone and every week they're playing giant steps and you have to like respond. So it's like, okay, I could continue to play mediocrely like I've been doing, or I could practice it. And then it becomes part of your voice and you like doing it. So, you know, I think
it's good. That you develop, But I wanted to ask David. You mentioned Bill Evans and well, that's Pete Seeger and John Coltrane. But like, let's say you early or mid '70s. What was the trigger? Was it Bill Evans, or who was the piano player, or not even necessarily piano player that got you into jazz? I mean, what was that moment? Do you remember that, or?
Yeah, for sure. My dad was a amateur jazz pianist and a real big fan of the music. And his favorite pianist was Oscar Peterson. He had 112 Oscar Peterson records.
Ooh, wow.
And so like when you would walk into my house in the evening, like my family house, it would just be Ray Brown walking for the entire, like, you know, as long as you were there. And, you know, so when I was a kid, I loved Oscar Peterson. And I mean, I still love and appreciate Oscar Peterson, but you know, there was a period too where I kind of rebelled against that, like where, you know, that's kind of what I was fed. But the first people that I really liked were Oscar Peterson, Wes Montgomery, and Ben Webster. And those, when I was 12, I liked those three guys, and I liked one record by each of them, and I just listened to it over and over and over and over again. And then, you know, because my dad was into, you know, a lot of pianists, I learned, you know, I heard Hank Jones and Tommy Flanagan and, you know, Barry Harris and, you know, all of the kind of like mainstream kind of jazz pianists. And he was more into like guitarists and pianists than horn players. That was just kind of his taste. So I think I was exposed to, you know, so like learning about Miles Davis and Sonny Rollins and all this, like that tradition, which we think of as so central to like the jazz, you know, canonical players, that came a little later, you know. So the record that really turned me on to jazz was probably Canadiana Suite by Oscar Peterson. And then the next one was a record of his called Easy Walker. And I don't remember the name of the Ben Webster record. I think it was some kind of reissue. And Wes, I used to listen to Smoking at the Half Note and Going Out of My Head I liked a lot. You know, so I liked his pop stuff, Road Song, those kind of things, you know. So but that's where I first got into it, you know. And I think like anybody else, one of the reasons why Canadiana Suite, which is a really beautiful piece of music, it's very focused on arrangements and melodies and harmony, and it's like it's less sort of wide open improvisation. It's like, I'm sure there are people who get into jazz by hearing, or in fact I know someone who recently passed who he heard like Ascension and that changed his life. But I think that's more often like somebody who's pretty sophisticated or has been around for a while. He was an older person, a great bass player named Mario Pavone.
Oh, sure. I have records of his. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So he was doing something else, I think, and then he heard that, and that was like a revelation for him. But you know, like as a 12-year-old, that's not exactly what I was thinking out the most avant-garde thing, you know. So you know, so I started with jazz pretty early, and I got into free players and Ornette and that kind of stuff in like my teens, I guess. And then, so I was kind of listening. I love the Keith's American Quartet.
That's amazing.
A lot of that kind of music, Old and New Dreams, you know, like Ornette influenced music. But then when I started playing with people, I sort of, you know, I guess what I realized, I went back to Cleveland, which is where I'm from. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And that's kind of hard bop, Midwest town, you know, kind of Rust Belt kind of city. And there were a lot of, actually, Tad Dameron is from Cleveland, and there are a lot of
Joe
people.
Lovano also, right?
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of.
Lots of them. Yeah.
Right. The reason why I mentioned Tad Dameron, though, is as a young person coming up, there was still remnants of that. Like there were people who sort of arranged in that style, and there were a bunch of older, like hardbop players. Now Joe Lovano is like closer to my age. He's older than me, but he was in like this newer wave. Of course, Joe like knew all that stuff. He was also his dad was a tenor player, Big T, Tony Lovano. Who I played with a few times. And but coming up in that scene, you were sort of expected to like learn that stuff. And it was great because there were older players who would beat you up, and so that was a good feeling, not a good feeling. It was terrible.
But yeah.
It was really helpful. And I had a lot of those kind of formative experiences. And then I think that's when you stop listening like a kind of like, jazz fan, and you start listening like a player, because they don't care how hip your taste is in terms of like, Paul Bley or Ornette Coleman or someone like that. If you can't like play a blues convincingly and comp more like, Mulgrew Miller or someone, or, Wynton Kelly, all the models, so you kind of realize this. I was in college and I came back and I was playing with some of these older players, and we would play like, Confirmation or something, and they had all this this beautiful melodic thing. Like bebop it's often, I think, misunderstood by students, because bebop seems like the rules that jazz educators taught students how to cover chord changes, and that's not what bebop is. It's like this, and that's one of the nice things that people have access to now is all Barry Harris's videos, and if some of those videos where Barry just like sings and plays, it's this gorgeous melodicism. Like to me, that's like a lot of the essence of and swing and all that kind of stuff. But it's this way of navigating chords that's so fundamentally melodic, So anyway, coming into that scene, and I was actually really lucky because there were some older players like that. I played in some house bands with some great older players, and for people that would come through town. When I was 20, I played for 4 nights with Sonny Stitt.
Oh wow!
And so, and it was just like very frightening and horrifying and exhilarating kind of experience, with a lot of highs and lows, some incredible highs and some awful lows. Anyway, because I was 20 and reading things out of a real book, and really it was like I was kind of ready to be inadequate on many levels. But there were also moments when he came over and he said, I played a solo on something, and that was the right time for me to do it, because I was really into Bud. So I was really trying to play like Bud, and something that I think he appreciated. And I played like a solo on Rhythm Change or something. I can't remember what the tune was, but he came over to the piano after. He says, "Man, that was a great solo." And I was like, "Holy,
that's amazing."
All right, kill me now, So it was like, but anyway, so I think when you start trying to play the music, when you start really trying to play jazz, and like in all the depths of what that means, then that's when like those taste ideas kind of give way to like a deeper understanding of what makes a player like Mulgrew Miller such an incredible, musician that everybody wanted to play with. And a lot of it is his comp, so so that's kind of, I went back to have that experience. I'm trying to remember what your question was now.
Oh, no. We're there. I'm listening. It's all you. It's just...
because you had a good question in there, but as usual, I just kind of go from.
No, I find
that many prompts.
I find all of this interesting. It's just to find out how you got where you're now, actually. So just I think all these. So the other thing
I was going to mention about Cleveland was there was also Cleveland was kind of an interesting place to be. It was. It was a rapidly shrinking city that had these kind of great people in the past, and also some of the recent past. I played with Joe Lovano a few times before he left, and then he used to come and sit in. He would always come into gigs when he was in town and sit in on drums.
Oh yeah, he's a killing drummer, actually.
Yeah, very Elvin-y and kind of loose, and so. And then it would always be funny when Joe would come back to, everyone called him Joey, and he would be like, he would come back to town, and it would be like, when you walk into the club, you'd be like, Joey's here, and there's like, people are kind of like excited. But then I don't know if he still is. I haven't seen him in a while, but he was kind of a hanger. He could really hang. So it'd be like in the beginning, people are like, "Wow, Joe Lovano's here. Cool. I better like get my good game on, and play well." And then by the end of the night, he's still at the bar hanging out. You're like, "Joe, I got to get out of here, man. Sorry." He would outlast everybody. But so anyway, it had people like Joe, and Kenny Werner was in and out of town a lot. He married a woman from Cleveland, and so did Mulgrew. I met Mulgrew when I was 21 on a gig.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
So there were interesting currents, and then there was a really interesting guitar player named Bill Orango. Do you know who that is?
Sure. Yeah, Lovano told me about him. Yeah.
I'm losing you for a second. So you know who he is?
Yeah, Lovano. Joe told me about him.
Yeah, he's pretty obscure. So
really obscure.
He was kind of a cult figure in a way in Cleveland because he was a guy who'd come through from swing music. He used to play on 52nd Street with, I'm sure Joe told you, with Ben Webster. And then he came back to Cleveland and sort of got into free, like just playing kind of free.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But he would play free over like tunes kind of, but it would have this weird swing element to it too. And then his comp was just really out. He would comp basically like this, his all fourths and straight up.
Oh, man, okay.
But he didn't comp that much. Mostly he was looking for other people to comp. And I remember we were playing a team. He's really open and incredible time. So he would kind of work with you on improving your rhythm. And one of the nicest things I ever heard him do, he played with a guy named Ramnan Raghavan who taught Jamie Haddad a lot and other people in Cleveland. He was a mridangam player, a South Indian or North Indian, I forget which one it is. Anyway, he was an Indian musician. And he and Bill just played duo, and it was just all this rhythm and just stuff at each other, and it was all free, and it was great. But anyway, I remember a gig with Bill where I was playing Rhodes, I guess, and he was playing. We were playing. He started playing around midnight. But I think like a fourth or fifth away from where the chords were. And the bass player, he had a thing about jazz bass players. He didn't like them very much. He was really he liked like funk and like he thought the time feel. He had like certain like things that he really believed. Like he liked, obviously records like I remember I was really into Speak No Evil record, and he's like, man, the time is terrible on that record. I'm like, what do you mean terrible? How could it be terrible? But he's like, he kind of liked this approach to time that was like almost more of a pop concept. He loved the metronome. So if he felt like the time going up and down like that he didn't really like it, and he had pretty flawless time himself. So anyway, we were playing this thing. So he had hired this bass player who was like a kind of funk player who didn't really know tunes. So he's like playing some kind of funk vamp in E. I'm playing the chords in E flat minor, I guess you would say. And he's playing the melody a fifth away in B flat. And he was like, and afterwards he was like, that was the best tune we played all night, So it's like he kind of liked this. He sort of brought a lot of chaos, but it was always with a real musical intent.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot from being around people like that. And so it was interesting with these older players. There were still some great older players, a great pianist named Ace Carter, many others like in Cleveland, that it was a nice place to come up. I think, when I got to New York, I was like, oh, wow, this is everything. There's everybody here. But even to have like a smaller group that you could learn from that included a lot of people, a lot of different strands was really a cool feature.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned New York. How did you decide to go to? I mean, it was a natural move, but like, what was the trigger that you decided to go?
I always knew I was going to move to New York, but I went to Boston I had taken a couple semesters at Berkeley, like a semester and a half. There's this Berkeley summer program that's short, and then I'd taken another semester. And then I went back to Cleveland. I graduated from a school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then I went back to Cleveland and played for a few years there. And I had gotten on the list of a guy named Charlie Banakis, who's a famous Boston area teacher. And I called him up and said, yeah, I think I should have come up on the waiting list. I got on it 4 years ago. And he looked at the list. He said, "Oh, yeah, I skipped you. I don't know why. You can come now if you want." So I moved back to Boston to stay with Charlie and got tendonitis pretty badly.
Oh,
And I stopped playing, and I was studying with I was coming to New York to study with a woman named Sophia Rosoff, who is a great classical teacher who taught like the whole jazz, like many people in the jazz community. Bruce Barth one, and Fred Hirsch, and Ethan Iverson, and Barry Harris studied with her. He was one of her first jazz students. So she was just somebody who would really help you work out those. In fact, actually, when I got tendonitis, I was working from a book that she had written about technique. So she was the natural person, and she was a good person for me to come study with. And so I came here, and yeah, and so I was just kind of barely getting by, not really playing much. I had a telemarketing job for a while. I mean, I was just like doing whatever, you know. So, but little by little, you know, I sort of got to the point where I'm like, either I'm gonna, you know, I'm just gonna get back into it and play, and if I have to stop again, then I'll stop. But I'll, you know, I got back into it, and then from then on, I was pretty steady. I just every month was better, and you know, it's not like I've never felt anything in my wrist or forearm since then, but it's always been manageable. And that period where I couldn't play was, you know, ended, and I you know, I did a lot of classical retraining. I mean, a lot of retraining with Savaya, and then years later with Kenny, I did some classes with. I mean, I spent some time with Kenny Werner, who actually when I first moved to New York, I lived in his house for a while.
Oh, really? Oh,
I knew from a long time. So,
who were the first players you hooked up with in New York? Like, you remember the first sessions or like gigs that you got? Professional gigs, let's say, like.
That's a good question. Wow, so this is like 85. I mean, there was a period where like, so I mean, when I first got here, I guess probably Eliot Zigmund,
oh really,
the drummer from
oh really, I did this interview the other day with him. Oh yeah,
oh cool,
yeah,
he did a trio record. That was one of my first records.
Dark Street, right? Yeah,
sorry,
Dark Street, right?
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah, I love that one. Yeah,
you're really getting into. Oh man, you get the obscure points. If you know Dark Street, you're really.
Yeah. I mean, with Mike Richmond, right? And yeah.
Wow, man, you are the man. You know everything.
No, we talked about it with
Eliot.
That's
a fairly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, Eliot put that together. I mean, I was sort of lucky. I was playing. There was a club called Green Street in Soho, and it was just you know, it was just this little club, and they had I got a gig there every Sunday night, and it was kind of early, like you could finish by 9:15, so you could actually make another gig if it was not too early. And I used to play, and it was 3 hours, and you know, it was like dinner and whatever, and it was like, but it was steady, and the piano was really nice. And I started out playing solo, and then immediately they added a bass player, and then eventually it was a trio gig every Sunday night. And so I used to play with Eliot or with Scott Colley or.
Oh really? Oh man, beautiful.
Larry, God, his name just shot out of my head. Larry.
Grenadier?
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Bad name to forget. I haven't seen him in a long time. Anyway, but you know, so people like that. But I had this trio gig, and everybody, you know, and people would come in and play, and it would just, you know, and it was easy. It was relatively short. Bill Stewart used to do it a lot. Billy Drummond. So all those people were sort of new on the scene in New York when I moved here. So those are all people that I kind of played with, and then shortly thereafter, there was a band that started with Tony Shear is a bass player I played a lot with, who plays with Bill Frisell now and many others. Anyway, we had a band with Tony and a drummer named Andy Watson, and it was led by a drummer player named Scott Wenholt. Yep. And that band played every Thursday at Augie's, which was a little...
Yeah, you know, sure.
So a kind of dive bar but then everybody would come in and play, and it would be Leon Parker and Josh Redman and Don Braden did it for a while. And anyway,
really?
it was just kind of Joel Fromm, Chris Potter, so I played Chris Potter's recital from music school.
Really? Oh, man.
And I played with Chris Potter when he had just moved to New York. He'd been here 7 days, I think. He'd been here for like a week or something. And Andy, the same drummer, who they're both from South Carolina, I think. Anyway, Andy brought him, and I said, do you know this tune? And Chris was like, no. And Andy said, don't worry about it, just play it. He'll hear anything, And it was like, that's kind of how he was. He was a pretty stunning talent. So, yeah, and so all those guys were people that I played with pretty early. So Kenny, Kenny sort of got me in as a sub at the Vanguard band, and then Kenny quit. So I did the Vanguard band for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
Before Jim McNeely came back. So that was another place that I met, certain relationships like Rich Perry, Dick Oatts, Billy Drews, people like that. So, yeah, and then, also I used to sub for Kenny with Tom Harrell, and then Tom Harrell hired me for a while, and then I've played with Tom in a lot of different contexts. I've subbed with him a lot with different bands. We did a duo tour in Italy. Just,
Oh, really? How beautiful.
Like that. Yeah, so all those, it just kind of, starts from something, and then you start playing with people. I think one of the earliest bands that I got with was Cecil McBee had a band.
Yeah,
and
you're Unspoken. Aren't you on Unspoken?
I am on Unspoken.
Yeah, I have that one. I love that. It's like
wow.
Yeah. It's James Dollar on trumpet. No, it's not.
James Dollar. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that record.
Randy Connors, the name of the alto player, and Matt Wilson.
Yeah. Beautiful record.
Well, and that was a cool group because Cecil had a really interesting sort of compositional concept.
Yeah.
But that was the first band I ever I remember we played the Ottawa Jazz Festival, and so it's like an outdoor festival, so it's like thousands of people or something. And the first tune was always this tune called Tight Squeeze, and it's free. And I was like, and I've been playing free music for a while, but I'd never, that was something I did at home mostly. It wasn't like, oh wow, go out to play like a big festival, and just the first tune was just like really energetic free music, and I was like, wow, okay, cool. So that was a nice experience to try and put the music in front of the nerves of performing it, so it was, and that was a really great experience to play with him because it was always that way.
Yeah, it's a beautiful record. It's quite an underrated record, I think. It should deserve more attention. It's really good. I mean, the tunes, and you burn on some tunes. Like isn't there Inside Out? I think it's one tune.
Oh wow, yeah.
Where you like kill it on the piano. Also, it's just like wow. It's really a cool record. I mean.
Oh, thanks. Well, I haven't listened to that record in many, many years. I don't even know if I have it, but yeah. But it was. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. In fact, today is Cecil McBee's birthday.
Really?
Yes.
Oh man. Wow.
Matt Wilson just sent me a text, and I was like, and he said, I just talked to Cecil, and I said, well, send me his number. I didn't have his number. So.
That Cecil record you made, you did Handmade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how did that happen? Like, I mean, now it makes sense that Tom is on trumpet, of course, but like, how did you decide to become a band leader? What's the story?
Well, I think, first of all, I write a lot. So I always had a strong, interest in putting bands together, I guess. But, the other thing is I think part of it also was I was going to Japan a lot around this time too. There was a guy that I used to play with for the month of August in Japan. And usually Cecil's tours were in Germany, and they were in July. So it was like I was kind of gone for the summer. And when you start traveling more and going in and out of town, sometimes the steady gigs that you were doing get a little fewer and further between. And then I did want to play, but also I was sort of trying to make things happen by generating work for myself, so it was both. But when I did Handmade, that was a record that I had put some bands together and tried to make a couple of recordings as a leader before that. The record with Eliot was a little bit like that. That was sort of a self-produced thing that Eliot sold to a label, and that's how it came out. I'd had another one. My first band was with Greg Gisbert on trumpet, Rich Perry on tenor, Tony Shear, and a drummer named Steve Johns.
Oh yeah, sure. Wow.
So that band played a little bit, and other people played in those different chairs and stuff. But yeah, I sort of had met. Also, I helped Matt Wilson produce a little bit his first record. Not much, just a few things. But I was at the studio session the first day of
the one with Dewey. That one?
Yeah, the one with
Dewey. Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
and Larry Goldie on it. Yeah, I think I had either transcribed. I think I transcribed the Duke tune on it. But anyway, so I was helping Matt a little with that, and we had done Unspoken, I guess. So those were all with Palmetto. So it was kind of establishing a relationship with the Palmetto people. A great producer there named Matt Ballesteros. Yeah. I mean, the owner of the label, it was named Matt Ballesteros. And so I had this, something I wanted to. I had the tunes that I'd been playing for a while, and the ones that were. I took all the ones that were I knew, well, now easiest is not exactly the right word, but they were successful. They were old tunes that I played a lot. And so I was like, that's how I put, they were all people I'd played with a fair amount, and they were all people I was friendly with. So it was Brian Blade and Ugonna Okegwo on bass, and Tom and Steve Wilson on saxophone.
Yeah.
So, I had done a few gigs with them, and some gigs with Billy Hart and not Brian, but basically that was it. I'd started playing with that group at Smalls, and we played 3 or 4 times, I guess, maybe, or something like that, and then we did the record. So that's how Handmade came about. And then, because this is something that I always tell younger musicians, and it's hard for them to imagine, but when you were with a label, you knew you were going to record something in 18 months or something. And so I started working on the next one, which was called Communication Theory, and then Leaving Home, and I did 4 for them. And then in recent years, I've done 2 more for that label. But so actually the second record was kind of hard to do, because after the first one, I got a little bit of press as for the composition side, and it wasn't an incredible amount, but it was enough to make me kind of self-conscious, and I had a really bad writer's block. And also I'd used up a lot of the tunes that I thought were the hits, so the second record was a little harder, but in the end I like all those records. They were fun to do.
How did you hook up with Brian Blade? I mean, I love, he's on those records, he plays amazing. He's one of the greats. What's your story with Brian?
Well, Brian is he's such an interesting musician. He, I know people who play with Brad, and they'll say Brad isn't the best piano player they ever played with. He's the best musician they've ever met, and it's he really has a big impact, and his impact on the music is really profound. That's how I felt with Brian. He was such a brilliant voice on the instrument, and he was so sort of hard to define, his dynamic range is huge. I mean, sometimes he'll play almost nothing, and other times he can be so fiery. And I always felt like he was around. He was in New York, and we played. I think the first time somebody just brought him over for a session. I can't remember first time I played with him, but I played with him 3 or 4 times, and and he was always such a supportive. I mean, he's almost like an otherworldly kind of presence, because he's such a sweet and gentle human being, and I can be a little bit sarcastic and snarky, and I always felt like I have to be careful when I'm around Brian, because he's such a spiritual being, I don't want to offend him. But I played with him. I guess I did 4 of my own records with him. But I also played with him on a vocalist record. I played with him on an alto player named Dave Pietro. He did I think 1 or 2 records with Brian. And then, I played with him in another number of different contexts, and then heard him all the time. And, for me, any band that Brian plays with immediately has really different sound and very recognizable, So it's been great to see the trajectory of Wayne Shorter's quartet with that, such a
it's amazing,
great force.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, he was, Brian's a very available person. He's not, I mean, he's not available because he's busy, but he's, and for a long time he lived in New York. Now he lives in Louisiana again. So, and there was a period where he lived upstate, and there was another period where he lived in Berlin for a while, I think. But so it's harder to hook up with him now. The last record we did was Six of One, I guess,
Yeah.
in 2016 or 17 or something like that. And and I just called him on a whim. I was putting a band together, and I was like, Brian, you wouldn't be able to make this, would you? Would you? And then I didn't hear from him for a while because he's sort of notorious for not responding to phone so well. When he lived here, you would always go to the gig and make sure you had everything, all the dates sealed in, because he's not so good with phone. But anyway, and then I didn't hear from him in a while, and then I started putting it together, and I don't think I'd gotten anybody yet. And then he called one day and it's like, hey, I have a break in 2 weeks and I can fly in and do it if you want. And I was like, yeah, I want. So, I mean, one of the great things about living in New York is the community and the people that you get to play with all the time. And, it's hard. In some ways it's a little harder because, so for example, the fourth record I did for Palmetto had Nasheed on it. Nasheed Waits. And I used to play with Nasheed in Japan. Like, I think we started around 93, and we'd go for a month.
Already? Oh, wow.
He was the bed drummer on that gig. And so Sam Newsome was the sax player, and it was led by a trumpet player, a Japanese trumpet player, who doesn't play very much anymore, I don't think. Anyway, so when I really wanted to record with Nasheed because I love his playing, but we had this period where we played again with all my music when we were on the road for a week, and then I thought, oh, I got to record this, and then you try and put it together and it doesn't happen, and you think there's going to be more gigs and there aren't, and we didn't play I think for 8 months, and then the next time we played was in the studio, and it's like, so that's one of the difficulties in New York. It's a little harder to keep a group together, because people are really busy. They go in and out of town. The things kind of, you pass like ships in the night more. But on the plus side, there are all these incredibly inspiring people. And when people, young players that move here, they're pretty outstanding, And so when Brian came, that was a great period. And it was, I'm glad that I got to know him and to work with him.
Yeah. I mean, I love it, especially him and Ugonna also on bass, Yeah, it's a nice combo you got there.
I think so. Yeah, very much.
Beautiful to hear them. They're really supportive all the time and respond. And I wanted to ask you about your hits, Dave. So, not a Christmas song. Your hits. Like, how do you proceed with writing when you do and you mentioned you had a writer's block, and how do you solve these issues? Or
well, that's a whole clinic right there. I'm because when you're teaching, because I teach a lot now, you mine yourself, you mine your own experience for things, and so I don't know how to teach composition, to be honest with you. But what I teach I teach composition a fair amount, which doesn't say much for my classes. But what I mean is, I can't evaluate, if somebody writes something and they're sincere, I'm not going to say that it's good or bad. That's up to the individual to decide. What you can talk about is what are composition strategies, what are techniques you can use, here's another approach, here's a process you can use. So I think in my case, that thing of being stuck is something a lot of people experience. And there really are ways to fix that. I mean, so one way to fix it is to write the song that you don't want to write. I mean, a lot of times when you're stuck, you're not writing something, because actually being stuck is an activity too. It's the process of not writing the thing that just wants to come out very often. Yeah. So I wrote a whole lot of tunes that I didn't much care for. That's why actually the second record, Communication Theory, was a little bit of a hard record, because I wasn't sure I really liked all the music, but it was kind of like, okay, this is what's coming out. This is what I'm going to write. You don't always get to choose. So that was one aspect. And then the other thing is, to give yourself this, like this idea of composition strategies. I'm really into that.
Mm.
So for me, there's really two aspects to composition that are really well within your control. One is to give yourself a frame, give yourself some way of writing. For example, if I tell you write any tune you want, that's a great amount of freedom, but very little direction. Yeah. If I say write a blues whose whole concept is that it is missing a couple of beats here or there, then it's much clearer. You know, you might write something like, I don't know, there's a great Bill Stewart tune called 7.5.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. On
brilliant tune.
Yeah,
that's a brilliant tune, and what's brilliant about it was the idea that he had to write it. You know, it's like, it's not like the tune is so amazing, although I think it's a really good melody, but you know, it's just a simple kind of you know, sort of riff, but the idea of making it 7.5 bars is really clever. So, you know, you could use that concept. Like you could, I'm not saying write 8.5. That would be a little too much maybe in the ballpark, but you can use that idea. You can use any strategy, and every tune has a kind of strategy. One strategy I've used a lot is this, or several times, is this idea of a repeating cell that kind of evolves through a chord progression. But that's like the basis of Bach preludes. They're like kind of arpeggiation that kind of keeps expanding by harmony. And so that's, I mean, I wrote a song on Handmade. There's a song like that called Fairy Tale. On Start Here, Finish There, there's a song like that called Cells. But I could write 10 more tunes, because that's, I mean, how many preludes did Bach write? You know, it's like having a structural idea is something that you can keep returning to. So I think being able to have strategies is one, like sort of being able to give yourself these kind of compositional frames, like pick something and explore it, you know? Yeah. Sometimes especially when I was younger, I used to think that you had to be like inspired to write music, but you don't have to be inspired to practice. So that means writing has to become more like practice. Like it's something you do because you're a musician or because you're a composer, you know? So anyway, so I try and take that attitude. The other thing is, and this Kenny Werner's really good for this, for thinking about this, is like this idea of like a process. So like if a musical frame is like looking at musical material and coming up with an idea that could be another, you know, a box, or an idea of like a structure of the piece, then a process idea is different. That's like, you know, get drunk and write the first thing that comes in your head. That's a process, right? That's not one I particularly recommend, but you know, that is like, that would be a process. So, you know, writing down 12 chords, chord symbols, and putting them in a hat and picking them out at random, that's a process. So I think those two ideas, that you can change your process or you can change the frame, and you can freely borrow other people's processes and other people's frames, you know, I think that helps. That really helped me get over the mental block that I had. And if anybody's interested, you know, I wrote a book called The Jazz Harmony Book, and there's a whole section on composition in it, and it's basically what I just said. Yeah. But
you've been
there's a few more things in there, but you gotta pay.
Jazz singers also writes another one. I saw.
For jazz singers, I wrote a practice book. I wrote 3 books.
Yeah, incredible. You're active as an educator, and I think you're a good one. You know, how you talk now, you know.
Thank you. You too. I heard you taught 8 hours today.
Yeah, man. I love it. I love teaching. I've been teaching for 20 years, but you know, you get a little bit tired after.
For sure.
I really get involved with the students, and then I'm like.
What kind of students were you teaching? I mean, what sort of?
It was like everything from jazz to technical death metal to, you know, I did Meshuggah with one student. You know Meshuggah?
Oh, wow, Meshuggah. Yeah.
Oh man, I love that.
Gene Jackson is a big Meshuggah fan. So
really?
In Japan, and and Ted Poor was a drummer. He's really into. He has a metal band, I think.
Yeah. I love that. It's just incredible what they do rhythmically. You should check it out. It's just like
I need to get more. I have to learn. I have to get more into the details of that. I have heard it, but it
I mean,
didn't.
it's not like to listen, to put it on and you'll like, cut carrots or tomatoes. It's just
Right.
like to study one tune for like, okay, it's interesting.
Because it's
Hallbeck
not
also, John is like a big fan of.
because
He
it's not improvised, right? I mean,
nah,
it's really
it's like
composed.
really, but it's basically drums are playing four and then guitars are kind of playing this syncopated riff in 15 over or something like that. It's like, what's happening,
Wow.
and then they come together and they're like, oh, okay, I got it. And
Wow.
it's quite intense actually. So, but yeah,
Well,
but
next listening project.
yeah, but David, just we started. You said that you played yesterday with Billy Mintz and
Yes.
Sean Conley. But what are your plans for the future? Like next project, is this one of the ideas, or like what are you planning? Are you still
Yeah.
planning to do the
I
bigger
mean,
group also with the horns with Dayna
yeah, I'm always
Stevenson?
going. Yeah, I always go back and forth. I did 2 records with a sextet,
Yeah, I
and
love that.
actually, it was one of it was so one was sextet. Actually, one of them is a septet, only for a tune or two. Um, I got the problem with that is when you go do gigs, you don't get to solo as much. it's it's and I don't know. I mean, not that it's not like I'm dying to solo on everything necessarily, but there's something about that play. Me as a player enjoys smaller groups. Me as a composer sometimes likes to write for larger groups, but the worst is big band. I mean, you hardly get to play at all. But anyway, I mean, I wrote some big band music a few years
Oh,
ago too.
really? Oh,
Yeah, it's not remarkable. Anyway, but it's I'm not really a big band writer, but it's okay. But yeah, I have a project that I want to do. I haven't figured out what kind of instruments. I think but I want to I'd love to do something with Dayna again. Dayna Stevens is one of my favorite horn players. I was also playing a lot with Chris Cheek, or not a lot, but I had started playing with Chris Cheek again.
really? Oh man, beautiful. I love Chris. Yeah, he's.
Yeah.
Whew.
So those are two. But this next thing, I think that I wrote a few things that are kind of more. They aren't really fusion exactly, but I don't think it'll be electric instruments unless Dayna plays Iwi on something. But more like larger ensemble, like more through composed. More. I was listening to a lot of Wayne records from like the 80s and
80
90s.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know exactly. I would like to do something that's more compositional in that way, and but it's such a funny time. It's hard to recording now is like really. I mean, it's always been a labor of love. It's never been a huge money making thing, but now it's like the amount of money you can spend, and you still have to pay musicians, like unless they're your friends, and even then you should pay them too. So it's kind of like it's not so easy to think about. Oh, a large ensemble project. It's funny. My wife is not a jazz fan. I mean, she likes it, and she likes obviously she likes my music or whatever, but she's not so knowledgeable about the world of jazz. And I was doing this tour with Tim Armacost and Gene Jackson and Daiki, this band we have in Japan, and so we wrote some big band charts for it. And Tim really likes to write big band music, so we each contributed for 3 or 4, and there was also a conductor involved who contributed 3 or 4 tunes. So we had this music, and so we were doing the tour, and like always, these tours that you put together, sometimes they do pretty well, sometimes it's kind of a struggle. So this one was a little bit of a struggle, and then I told my wife Shoko, I was like, yeah, so tomorrow we're going to be playing with the big band, and she's like, what do you mean the big band? I was like, well, we add 13 more instruments. And she was like, wait a second, you guys are you're barely breaking even with 4. Why did you add 13 people? I was like, well, it's kind of a thing. It's sort of hard to explain why, and she was like, just didn't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really working, so I think we'll make the band 4 times as large.
We are bizarre creatures. Yeah.
Yes, we are bizarre creatures. So, we're always trying to think of the next thing. But I do want to do this project. I'd like to have Dayna involved. I'd like to have Rogerio Picado involved. Maybe Joe Martin, some other people that I've been seeing around lately, and maybe some orchestral instruments to fill it out. So hopefully I have some clarinets and flutes, maybe.
I'm looking forward.
Yeah.
Looking forward. Cool. Cool,
Well,
David. I'll let you
nice.
go now since you had a hectic day.
I feel very guilty for keeping you up so late.
Oh,
but
come
I'm
on.
glad-
No, it was my idea anyways. You know,
But it's